In this video, I want to talk to you about the difference between expert witnessing and behind-the-scenes legal nurse consulting. I know there's a lot of confusion out there about what that means among nurses who maybe are just trying to break into the legal nurse consulting realm. And a lot of times, attorneys as well are pretty confused. And they think that when they think of legal nurse consultants, they automatically think of expert witnesses. And you may be in that same boat where you're like, hey, isn't that the same thing? Like as a legal nurse consultant, don't you just get put on the stand and get grilled by opposing counsel and have to stand your ground and know all the facts? And that's really not the case. So expert witnessing and behind the scenes have a lot of similarities, but they also are extremely different in some very key ways that I want to talk about today. Now, as a legal nurse consultant, you are able to do both or either. There are legal nurses out there who are strictly experts. They never do behind the scenes work. Expert witnessing is all they ever do, and that's perfectly fine. No problem with that at all. Other legal nurse consultants, they only do behind the scenes. They never act as an expert, which is also perfectly fine. And then there are those who do both. They do expert witnessing and they do behind the scenes legal nurse consulting. And there's no problem if you want to do both at the same time, as long as they're not on the same case. So let's talk about how these two areas of legal nurse consulting really differ and how they're the same. So first of all, the way that they are the same. Let me talk to you about some of the similarities between the two. So both behind the scenes and expert witnessing, you're working as a nurse using your knowledge and expertise to help the attorney-client put together their case. As a behind-the-scenes legal nurse consultant, you have a different primary objective, which I'll go over here in a second, than you do if you're an expert witness. As an expert and a behind-the-scenes legal nurse, you have a fully remote job. The only caveat to that is that as an expert, you may be called to a deposition. Those can be virtual, those can be in person, or you may be called to actually testify in court, called a testifying expert. So then that's not so much remote because you actually have to be in a certain place at a certain time. Apart from that, the actual case reviews, the data analysis, the medical record analysis that you're doing in both is fully remote. As an expert or behind the scenes, you have to be very careful to keep confidentiality. So if you are working remote by the pool or in your favorite restaurant, you need to be sure to keep the records that you're looking at confidential because, of course, even though you're not taking care of a patient in a hospital, you still have to respect HIPAA. So those are some of the similarities between the two. Now let's talk about some of the differences. And if you're okay with this, I'd like to draw this out for you. Let me see if I can share my screen and draw this out for you in sort of a table format here. Okay, so let's just do this. Let's write behind the scenes. And then over here, let me move this microphone. Let's write expert. And then we're just going to separate those here like this. Okay, so behind the scenes, one of the key things that you need to know as a behind the scenes legal nurse is that everything you're doing, you need to keep confidential. So that means you need to mark all of your work product as confidential. There is a privilege that you're going to have here where the attorney's not going to be allowed to share the work product that you're doing with opposing counsel or with the courts, because everything you do, and don't y'all pick on my handwriting. I know my wife tells me my handwriting is absolutely awful, and I tend to agree with her. So this confidential work product is only meant for your attorney-client. As an expert, though, super important that you understand that everything you're doing is no longer confidential, and instead everything you're doing is actually fully transparent. Transparent meaning discoverable, fully discoverable, and not just that it can be found, but the opposing counsel is literally legally required to get your work as an expert witness. And your work isn't just the work product, it's anything you write down. So you have to be very careful in what you write down in text messages to your attorney client and emails, even on sticky notes. Those are all discoverable in court to the opposing counsel and to the courts themselves. So huge difference right there, confidential versus transparent. Another thing, when you're doing a case review as a behind-the-scenes legal nurse, that case review, that report and chronology is very detailed. So you're going to give a very detailed chronology, detailed chrono. So that chronology, I'm going to do another video that goes over exactly what the chronology should include in it as a behind-the-scenes legal nurse consultant. But ultimately, you're going to have a lot of information in there, definitions, explanations, opinions, possibly illustrations, possibly links to research that you're going to have in that chronology in a behind-the-scenes capacity. Now, as an expert, there typically isn't even going to be a chrono that you're going to turn into the attorney, not in the context of a chronology, the way you'll learn to do it. If you were to join Catalyst, the way we teach you to do it in a behind-the-scenes case. Typically, you're not doing a chronology in that same sort of format. Instead, that's usually all covered in your report. So let's talk about that report. In a behind-the-scenes case that you're working, you're going to give a very detailed report. And again, I'm going to do a different video down the road a little bit that will tell you everything that should be included in an amazing report. In a expert case, the narrative of the case is just, I'll call it vanilla. It's just going to be a little more vanilla. And for those of you who are out there who do expert work, don't get offended by that. It's not going to be as fluffy. It's not going to be as, it's going to be a lot more fact-based, vanilla. Here are the facts of the case. All opinions that you have, this is going to be a very important part, is in a behind the scenes, your opinions you can tell to the attorney in the report and chronology. That's okay. As an expert, it's really important that any opinions that you do form, you communicate those with the attorney prior to actually putting them in writing, because again, anything in writing is admissible to the courts. So you want to give the attorney a call and just, if you email them, say, look, can we have a quick conversation? I got a question for you. And then you tell them verbally what your opinions are. Make sure that they are okay with you putting those in writing. So it's a lot more vanilla, I think is a good word for it, as an expert report, because it has a different purpose. And let's talk about that. The purpose of a behind-the-scenes chronology and report is to educate the attorney. You're looking to educate and inform the attorney on what the records say, what is going to help them, what's going to hurt them, what's their next steps, what's missing, and really just help educate them so they go into these settlement negotiations or into court fully prepared to win. In an expert case, your primary objective isn't to explain or educate. It's really to provide more of a expert statement, let's call it. Expert statement. So you're going to, it's going to be very fact-based, which both are, but as an expert, man, you got to make sure that whatever you say, it's golden. You can't stretch things because you're going to be giving your expert the facts of the case and your expert opinion under sworn testimony, right? So you are standing at risk of penalty of perjury if you fudge anything, right? If you get anything wrong, if you can't support what you're saying, you could be in big trouble. So this is extremely fact-based, and you're giving an expert statements or an expert testimony, not looking to help educate the attorney. Behind the scenes reports and chronologies, it's more like, sitting at the table with the attorney, having a conversation with him about what your analysis was. Whereas an expert case is not anything think of it as sitting in court, sitting in a courtroom and giving expert testimony. Another thing important to know about behind the scenes is that you can sub these out. So you can sub out. What that means is you can pay another legal nurse consultant to actually do the work for you, and then you will review it and turn it into your attorney. We sub out almost all of our work that we get at Loveless Legal Nurse Consulting. We keep some every once in a while, but for the most part, we sub out all the work. As an expert, you can't sub out, right? You can't sub out any of the work that you're doing. You're trading your time for money. You don't get paid unless you put in the time, and no one can do the work for you because you are the expert. In a behind the scenes case, you and your team can then do the work. So as long as your team does the work the same way you do it, the same way your attorney expects it to be done, then you can pay part of your team, one of your team members who's also a legal nurse consultant, to do the work. You review it and turn it into the attorney. So the cool thing about this subbing out is that really gives you the opportunity to leverage your full potential through business ownership. You can have 20 cases at a time, sub them all out, charge the attorney $150 an hour, pay your subs, say $50, $60, $70 an hour, whatever you choose, but you're making $100 an hour on each one of those, right? So you could literally be making hundreds and hundreds of dollars while someone else is doing the work because you have chosen to be a business owner. So those are very different. As an expert, you don't make money unless you put in the time and do the work. And then pay range. Let's talk about that super quick. Pay for a behind the scenes, you're looking at, on the super low end, I never recommend going below 110 per hour. And depending on your education, your training, your background, your experience, you might go up to 175, 200 per hour, just depending. Now, typically, the going rate is going to be about 150 per hour. That's what I charge. That's what most of the members in Catalyst charge. And that's a nice range for you to consider as you are working as behind the scenes. Now, as an expert, I find a lot of experts who don't know what they're doing, who have never done it before and never been trained, undercharge dramatically. On the low side, if you've never done it before, maybe this is a case that is your very first expert case. Maybe it's a very easy case. Maybe you just don't want to charge a lot. But on the low end, you shouldn't charge less than $250 an hour. On the upper end, you're going to charge about $450 an hour plus. And you can literally, it's carte blanche. If they want to use you as a expert, you can kind of tell them whatever, and they can decide if they want to use you or not. And then there's a whole training I have in Catalyst about this, where I give you a contract that's separate. It's a very different contract for expert witnessing than behind the scenes. I give you both in Catalyst, but the expert contract really lays out, travel. If I'm doing a case review and analysis, if I am providing virtual deposition, if I'm in person at court, there's different costs for all of that the attorney should be expected to pay or cover or reimburse, like flights and such. And I go over all of that in detail inside Catalyst in that expert witness lesson. So hopefully this really helped to define some of the difference between expert witnessing and behind the scenes for you guys, and cleared up some of the questions you might have had. I encourage you guys, if you enjoyed this and you want to learn more about how to become a legal nurse consultant, check out my other video that's called How to Become a Legal Nurse Consultant. That will give you all the information about that pathway and a little more about Catalyst, where you can book a call with us. You can always go to our website, catalystcoachingandmentoring.com, if you want to learn more about who we are. And I'd love to be your mentor if you ever decide you want to take that path. Thanks very much.